Welcome to Check-In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone who is leading the way in this work to join me for a conversation to help educate and inspire us. My guest today is Greg Pryor. Greg is an accomplished talent management leader and a recognized pioneer in social network science. He co-founded the Connected Commons, a community of professors and practitioners dedicated to advancing social network research and its application in organizations. His Harvard Business Review cover story, How to Succeed in a New Role, was celebrated as one of HBR's top 10 management ideas of 2023. Which is pretty awesome. Also, Greg and Kristen Cullen-Lester curated contributions from 50 experts in their forthcoming book, The Social Capital Imperative, Revealing, Developing, and Leveraging Organizational Networks. Now, Greg also has a long history as a senior HR leader internally. That's kind of where he honed his craft. He was senior vice president and people and performance evangelist at Workday most recently. In this role, he drove exceptional business growth and fostered a globally recognized workplace culture, earning the Innovator of the Year award from the Great Place to Work Institute in 2019. Greg, thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Jason, thank you for having me. Obviously, as we'll get into more, your podcast is like all of my most favorite stuff in the world. And so it is a privilege and pleasure to be geeking out on this topic, which I know you are passionate about. And I'm sure the listeners will hear that I'm pretty passionate about as well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was delighted that you said yes to do this, or we had a book as a reason to do this, because I get to talk about two of my favorite things, relationship building and organizational network analysis, which is something probably some people don't know a lot about or maybe aren't as familiar about. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, let's back up a little bit and just learn a little bit more about your work and what you're doing today. So tell us a little bit about the Connected Commons and what you all are doing over there.
Yeah. So as you had sort of teed up, and thank you for that very kind introduction. You know, I'm a 30 plus year practitioner in the human capital space. And gosh, it was probably 10 or more years ago, Jason, that I got connected with my good friend and colleague and true pioneer in this space, Rob Cross. Through our good friend, Courtney Harrison. We had been doing some work at the time, and I did my first O&A, more than 10 years ago. And it was amazing what we were able to see in the organization, the impact it was able to have. And so, you know, it feels like for me that moment in the Wizard of Oz, where it goes from black and white to Technicolor, I all of a sudden saw the world in this additional dimension, which is I had been a human capital person forever. And all of a sudden now I was able to add the social capital lens to the heritage human capital lens. And for me, you know, I have been hooked ever since. So thank you to my friend, Courtney Harrison and Rob Cross. And we'll get into some of the other amazing people in this space who I know you know well. But I saw the world in three dimensions all of a sudden. And it changed the way I think about work.
So you started using that science in your work sort of internally as a talent management HR leader. And then that evolved into when you left Workday, Connected Commons. You all had started that a while ago. So tell me a little bit more about Connected Commons. Like, I know that it's evolved, I think, over time, but what is Connected Commons and why would people want to connect there?
As its first instance, if you will, Jason, as the network roundtable. Rob started that many, many decades ago to really evangelize this world of social network, social and organizational network science. We sort of reinvented it. Myself, Chris Ernst, Rob, Michael Arena, a number of other folks, probably again about a little over a decade ago, to really help bring people together in a way to understand and apply specifically organization network analysis in the sort of broader domain. And so that has been, I retired from Workday a number of years ago, really to put my energy into evangelizing this topic, which in my own experience had this monumental effect when I added connections to the sort of heritage human capabilities. It just unlocked so much. And I believe, Jason, as I know you believe as well, like there's so much low-hanging fruit when we add this idea to the toolbox of practitioners in our space. I'm just super excited about it and super excited to share what others are learning and to enable people to apply this tool in their work.
So for those that are not initiated to this, I mean, first off, I need to back up and I'll tell you kind of the moment for me. And it's interesting because I remember distinctively, it was at the very first Human Capital Institute Summit. And this goes back like probably 20 years. I stepped into a session that was something about networks, and it was Rob Cross at the front of the room. And he stood up there and talked about, he's been evangelizing it longer than almost anybody that I'm aware of. And he was telling a story about, he sort of educated about it. And then he told the story about a client and how they had used this kind of this technology, or this RFID technology, to light up connections on a big wall. I think it was Mars at the time was the case study he was talking about. And it blew my mind. I mean, to your point, I don't know that for me, it was I wasn't at a point where I got to see the Technicolor yet, but it certainly just blew my mind open in terms of potential. And so that's where my exploration or curiosity about it started. But I know that you and I both share this sort of like head scratching kind of thing about like, why hasn't this become more prevalent in our work? Why hasn't this made it in? And so let's back up a step and talk about like, what is organizational network analysis? What is this thing that we're talking about? And maybe help people think about like, so what is it and where are we in the evolution of kind of being able to apply this inside of organizations?
Yeah, no, and thanks for the opportunity to maybe geek out and paint some context before we get into some of the further content. So I think part of the challenge, Jason, has been like we've been focused a little bit too much, and it's a brilliant tool of organization network analysis, the tool. If I could like broaden the lens or frame just a little bit, there is this domain of sort of social and organizational network science, right? O&A, or organization network analysis, of which there is passive and active ways to do that, is an amazing tool to reveal what the networks look like. And I would suggest that the revealing or insight piece has been an absolute important first generation. What I'm excited about, I know what you're excited about, is how do we take those insights and actually apply actions to achieve outcomes? So we'll get into that a little bit in a moment. I think the first generation of social and organizational network science, which Rob absolutely pioneered, Ron Burt, Michael Arena, other good friends have been amazing in that space. But I'm excited about where we go next, which is applying actions to specific outcomes. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that. But maybe I could give you a super maybe crazy or practical example for our listeners who may not be as familiar with it. So we're recording this not too long after the beginning of the new year. So I was reflecting on interesting things happening in 2024. And one of the maybe fascinating things, especially to music lovers, an unexpected phenomenon was Post Malone's rise to be one of country's biggest Billboard hits in 2024. Former rapper, if you're not familiar with, sort of the music scene, Post Malone. I believe that Post Malone actually applied very thoughtful network science, the idea of network science, and specifically connections and relationships, to not try to push himself into the world of country and build a fanship base, but to actually very strategically, and I'll double click in just a few of the ideas for a moment just to explain it, what he was so intentional about as he aimed to get pulled into and get a reputation within the country music world was he was very intentional about doing songs with country music legends, and not just with country music legends across multiple generations. And my good friend and your friend Chris Ernst has done amazing work on this idea of looking at boundary spanning across networks. And so he was able to co-produce and co-deliver songs with people from different generations. So he immediately tapped into the generational difference. He used some of country music's, the Nashville who's who of artists that were on and co-produced that. And what I'd suggest maybe in a sort of geeky way is his most brilliant move was connecting with someone who is absolutely central and incredibly influential in the country music scene, which is Dolly Parton. And so when you look at both Beyonce's entrance into country music and Post Malone's transition into country music. They both used the Parton principle. They connected with the super connector, who then gave them legitimacy, who invited them in, who connected them with other people who could then slingshot them in the world. So I know it's a bit of a crazy example, but it, for me, is not dissimilar to what we discovered. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about when you're new to a role, how do you actually connect with a few very specific people? How are you very intentional about getting pulled into that network rather than trying to push yourself into the network, which is like pushing a rock up a hill, Jason, as you know, and very, very hard to do. So this idea of social network science is really about sort of unlocking what you know through who you know and being very intentional about that.
Mm. Well, and when we were talking in the lead up, this is a topic obviously for me that's been central. The first book that I wrote with my friend Joe Gerstant, which we published clear back in 2012, I guess, coming up 13 years ago, was about social capital, right? It was all about unleashing the power within our networks and social capital, not necessarily through the organizational lens, but just as we were kind of trying to unpack what we had learned as young professionals, as people making our way, and recognizing that truly that saying, it's not what you know, but who you know that matters. There's real gravity to that. And if you unpack that and you're intentional about that, you can individually accelerate your impact and your growth and your success. But when you learn how to do that organizationally, it's like a superpower. It's like putting a turbocharger on the organization. And I used to talk about that as the way I used to describe that was kind of the new talent. I used to call it the new talent equation, which was human capital times multiplied by social capital, like the relational capital, the relationships, the connections, the trust that you have takes that what you know and amplifies its impact exponentially.
1,000%, Jason. I mean, that's it. That's, for people who are new to this idea, I sometimes refer to this when working with people as a stupiphany. It's something that they immediately see, and that it is so obvious, and yet it is a complete surprise at the same time. I have really never had anyone say, I just don't think that's the way the world works, or that has not been my experience. They immediately step back and say, completely new idea, but it absolutely makes sense. And so to your point, sort of unlocking what you know through who you know. And I think you brilliantly share the idea. It's being intentional about that. I'll geek out for just one moment on this because I think it's fascinating. If people are not yet familiar with the work of Robin Dunbar, Ron is an anthropologist who actually talks about the neuroscience of friendships and the neuroscience of relationships. And I think one of the big myths from back in the 80s, when people think about networks or networking, there was this notion of you should have a big network. Well, the reality is that our brain physiologically can only hold or holds and can manage about 150 relationships. And so the intentionality, Jason, to your point of saying, am I optimizing, maximizing, nurturing those, let's call it 150, which is known as Dunbar's number. And if you're not familiar with Robin's work, I'll add a great podcast that people can listen to become familiar with, or his book on friendship is brilliant. But there is a limited amount of literally space in our brain that we can manage these relationships. And there are folks like you and others who are unlocking to say, how do you do that with greater intentionality to improve greater impact?
So, all right. So I think that this feels like a good place to transition into talking about a particular project, some work that you did with an organization. And this is the linkage here is that this is going to be a chapter in the book, the forthcoming book, The Social Capital Imperative, which is coming in the spring. But this is a project that you did in partnership with an organization to try to help them solve a particular problem related to onboarding, if I understood that correctly. So can you set us up a little bit in terms of just, who, like roughly what kind of client? I don't think you named the client, but roughly what kind of organization was this and what problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah. And so as just a setup to that, to your point, and we talk about it in the book, is I think one of the other reasons that this area has not gotten quite the pickup that you and I would expect, given what we understand is the power of it, is that we've been more looking at the tools and saying, it's sort of a hammer in search of a nail. I have this really powerful O&A tool, And I do think if we start by thinking about the outcomes or the organizational priorities and impacts, what we talk about in the book are 9 very specific areas, Jason, some that are associated with organizations, some that are associated with groups, and some that are associated with the individuals. And so the one area in the book that we talk about that you can have a real impact is career management. And so we provide this one case study, which I did with my amazing friend and colleague, Deb Zahner. And it's a companion case to the incredible academic research on the impact of your connections on your career. And we have some amazing work in the book, amazing contributors in that space. In the case, what we were able to do, Rob Cross, David Sylvester, and I, again, back in 2022, wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review on how to accelerate careers. And we had actually done 5 years of research identifying what we refer to as the fast movers. When we looked at network analysis, using network analysis, and we in the Connected Commons, and particularly Rob, had access to hundreds and hundreds of network analysis, we found that most people take about 3 years to replicate the network of a high performer, not just to be a good contributor, but to actually build the trust that you talked about a couple of moments ago, to have the relationship with the influencers who can accelerate and amplify your good work within the organization. And you may say, wow, 3 years. In today's world of work, we don't have 3 years to be switching on to new teams, right? The good news is we found a small number of people in the analysis that we then referred to as the fast movers. These were people who were able to replicate the network of a high performer 3 times faster than their average peers. So this became important. What did they actually do? And we identified 12 practices. In the case, what we talk about, we had a chance to work with a very large, very successful analytical consulting organization. Following soon after the pandemic, they were looking for new ways, especially in a remote context, to onboard lots and lots of people into their organization. And they were discovering that the connections they used to build for a proximity advantage were more challenging. And so we were able to take a control group, if you will, a group of folks, and then we were able to take a pilot group, and we were able to share with them these very specific practices and make them aware of the idea even of having a network and how the role your network played in accelerating your success within the organization. Not only your success, Jason, but your sense of satisfaction, your sense of belonging, your sense of understanding and feeling engaged and energized by the move you just made to join that organization. And so that was the context, and we were able to run for 6 months a control group. This was a very analytical company, and I love that about them. They were like, we're going to take people and we're not going to tell them about these skills. We're going to take another group of people and we're then going to do a network analysis after 6 months, and we're going to see how their networks were different based on their application and the insights that their managers, who were also on this journey, had with them. So that was the setup, a 6-month program, being very intentional about helping them think about how to develop their network and then giving them the skills or actions they should take to nurture their network.
So just to put a fine point on, so the goal was to take this is to discover ways through, and we'll talk a little bit about how here in a minute, but through these sharing these fast mover practices with the pilot group to accelerate them to higher levels of performance over the course of that 6-month period.
And specifically, Jason, those higher levels of performance were by replicating the networks of high performers. Yes. So it's exactly that. There are things we know through the science about what a high performer's network looks like, how they engage and activate that network, to your point. And so that's exactly what we were looking to do, is say, if we teach these practices and look at the context related to this, can we accelerate the number of fast movers into an organization who are able to make a contribution faster than their peers? Okay,
great. So let's unpack a little bit how that works. So those that were in the pilot group, in that 6-month pilot group, what did the intervention actually look like for them? Like, what were you teaching them? What were you showing them? How were you doing it? Can you give us a peek inside what that looked like?
Yeah, I will say, and again, I'm happy to share that in detail. I think the big idea, and again, this is going to sound so trite and so simple, was the big stupiphany that just letting people know that their networks played this really essential role, and there was a body of research just unlocked for people the intentionality of looking at those networks. So the big bang of just even saying there is such a thing, because we've been trained, unfortunately, forever in the classic literature and work is all about your individual capabilities, Jason. The classic work in this space is about you getting points on the board, you pushing your way into the network. And what we told people in today's world of work, where your colleagues and your peers play a much greater role in your success, you need to appreciate it's both your capabilities and your connections. Once we unlock that for people, then we were able to very specifically identify the different types of connections and how to do that. I'll give you a super practical example. And I'm going all the way like root level into the weeds, if you will. But this was such a powerful idea. Often when we meet someone, when we're new to a role, we meet someone for the first time. You would meet me. I'm new to your organization, Jason. And you would say, Jason, hey, Greg, tell me about yourself and the work you've done in the past so that I could get to know you. And that's a very kind thing to do. And that's what happens in most situations. The fast movers stopped for a moment and said, Jason, I can't wait to tell you about the good work I've had the privilege to do. But before I do that, if you could give me a sense of your priorities and our company's priorities and the team's priorities, just for a couple of minutes, that would really help me frame what I'd love to share with you. That one simple move where you then say, you know what, we're really focused on work in the human capital space, or we really want to think about AI and the implications of AI. What I'm able to do then is align my expertise to context that matters to you. And so when I then say, hey, these are some of the things I've done in the past, it immediately creates neurologically for you, Greg is one of us. Because our brains process people as foes until we process them as friends. And so you would listen to me as I'm telling my story through a context of Greg is a foe. I'm going to actually literally process what he's saying to me through the limbic system of the brain. When I align it to what's important to you, you begin starting to make connections and say, wow, maybe I should connect Greg to Sally. Maybe I can leverage his work here. Or I go as far as to say, Jason, I'd love to introduce you to a previous colleague who did work in that space. Would that be interesting? And immediately and neurologically, Jason, what happens is you switch to being a friend, you process through the limbic system. And then not only is that powerful for you, but then you trade your social capital. You said, hey, Greg, I think you should really talk to Sally. The work you've done might benefit her. You reach out to Sally and say, Sally, I think you might want to connect with Greg. He's done some interesting work. Now I'm trading on your social capital rather than trying to build my own social capital that I don't have. And I know that sounds super nerdy and geeky, but it's that practical and it's that simple. These fast movers did different things that set them up to accelerate getting pulled into the network rather than trying to push themselves into the network.
It's super interesting. And what it brings up for me, it reminds me that like one of the luckiest things that probably happened to me from an ability to have impact inside of organizations is I started my career in sales. So I understood that people make decisions, like we buy from people who we like. And so how do salespeople get you to like them? Well, when you show up, they start asking you questions to understand what matters to you. And then they position themselves as someone who is like you. We have the stuff in common. And then all of a sudden, I'm not buying from a stranger, I'm buying from a friend. Like it is 101 sales and influence tactics. And the great networkers understand that. Like we like people who are like us or who can help us, we perceive can help us. That's genius. And it's so simple.
And some people, Jason, might think about that. 100% agree, by the way, but might think about that as a bit manipulative. And what I would suggest it is literally a neurological strategy to get me to connect with you. And so I don't think about it. I mean, you could think about it as that way a little bit, but what I'm doing is actually I'm using what we know from a brain science, from a network science or relationship science, and what I'm doing is I'm accelerating exactly as you said. To say, hey, I want to support you. I want to be part of this team. I want to be seen as a contributor. I will be more successful, Jason, if you invite me in to be part of the answer. And that's the way I can do that. And again, we saw through the research that it accelerates 3 times my speed. Typically, instead of 3 years, I can have the network of a high performer myself in about 9 months if I apply these sets of practices, which are very actionable, very thoughtful, 100%.
So was most of the work that you did with the pilot group, was most of it about you're starting with, it sounds like, some mindset shift, like introducing this idea that this is really important and we're going to support you in this, we're going to measure this. But then I'm assuming it's also just equipping them with some skills or some tools or some ways to go about it.
Yeah, we sort of broke it down a bit into mindset, skill set, tool set, to your point. The big mindset was, yes, connections matter, right? Once you sort of see that, the world becomes, and then we gave people very specific skills like the one I mentioned, which is this idea of aligning your expertise to other people's context. And so we taught a series of things very similar to that. And then we had a series of tools that people were able to look and say, okay, how do I want to think about these skills in the context? I'll give you another sort of very super simple example. When we think about trust, there are actually, as you know, really 3 different types of trust. And understanding that I want to build, for example, benevolence trust. If I'm a new leader with the team, my team cares about, do you care about me? And so specifically, if you're a team leader, what you want to do is you want to show your team benevolence trust. You want to show your leader is concerned about your predictability, or what we call integrity trust. Not that you don't have integrity, but that your words and your deeds sort of match, that you're not a random act. So your supervisor or people leader yourself wants to see this sort of integrity trust. And your clients and colleagues want to see your capability or competence trust. And so understanding that I'm going to shift my focus and outcome when I meet with different people. For my people leader, I want to let them know that I'm a consistent, reliable person. For my team, I want to show them I care about them. For my clients, I want to show them I've got capability. And so you apply these ideas. That would be a sort of another specific example. And the tool set would be, how am I going to, when working with my people leader or manager, show them that I have integrity trust? When I'm working with my customers or colleagues, that I have competence trust. And so we help them with a set of tools that think about the application of that through sort of network maps, if you will.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this in a second. I want to come back to the skill things in a second, but this is where I do want to, at least for a moment, talk about the ONA and kind of what that technology or what that tool can do in terms of measurement, because you were using that to then measure the difference between the impact of these 2 cohorts. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I know that like it's most important that you understand social science and you understand the value of social capital, and that you recognize that like investing in relationships is as or more important than investing in your human capital at different times. But there's also a way to measure this. There's a way to make it visible. And so can you give us, I know it's hard to do when we're just voice or video, we're not showing pictures, but what does an organizational network analysis look like, or what does it do, and what does it show us?
Yeah. And so there are 2 types of network analysis. The work that we primarily do is what's referred to as an active network analysis. We set up a set of questions. We distribute those questions to the network, and then we ask them, beginning to identify the 15 to 30 people that you primarily go to get your work done. Again, this idea back to Dunbar's number, believe it or not, it's really sort of 10 to 15 people are the core people you get your work done. There's a broader group, and that's interesting. And again, if you were to look up Dunbar's number and Dunbar's research, you'll see sort of scales of that. But we start by saying, who are those people? And then we ask a number of questions, Jason, related to the relationships that you have with those people. Who are the people you go to get new ideas? Who are the people you go to help you build your career? Who are the people who give you a sense of belonging? Or you take those lists of people and you identify them, and then we look at very specific intentional outcomes related to sort of innovation, execution, and thriving at its sort of base, at its biggest point. And based on what we want the network analysis to do, we set those questions up so that we can then see, and to your point in the example of the control group, when we did a pre and post network analysis with these new hires, we saw that the people who were a part of our pilot group were much more likely to be identified as someone who long tenured people in the company would go to get new ideas than the control group. And so that's where we would very specifically look and measure, wow, when this person was intentional about reaching out to an influencer in the organization and applying those skills, the influencer identified them as someone who they might go to get new ideas. In the case of the control group, that was much less likely to happen. But that would be a really specific example of where we would set up the thesis, where we knew it would add value for new hires to accelerate very specific relationships. And then we could measure that not only from the individual, but from others who would say, yeah, I'm pulling Greg into this situation. And so those would be examples. And at the end of the day, it shows up as a network diagram. You can see the relationships both ways, and then you can see all of these different attributes related to where is the innovation network. So we asked the question, who do you go to get new ideas from? You toggle that on, as you can imagine, and you can immediately see where the network, you toggle that one step further by tenure, and you can see tenure. You toggle that one step further, maybe by skills, if you have skill assessment from a Workday or something else. And you can now see very specifically where ideas travel through the organization. We ask another question is, who do you go to diffuse your ideas into the organization, as an example? And you can see, we know that energizing connectors or bridgers are the most important people to spread new ideas. And so if I'm connected to one of those people, the likelihood that my idea will become diffused and accepted by the organization is much higher. If I'm a new hire, or if I'm anyone in the organization, let's say I'm in a critical product role, we turn those nodes on in the network analysis and we see, Greg, this important product leader, has no connections to the influence network in the company. The odds that my ideas are going to be influenced or accepted are basically nil.
This is the Technicolor, right? This is when Wizard of Oz comes color, is when you see this information. And the thing that I guess part of the reason I want to have this conversation is just, again, another plea to people to take a look at this, at social network science, to take a look at the tools that are out there. Because I do think, I guess one of the things, as you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I think part of the reason that there's such a struggle around conversations about inclusion, for example, is because it's really hard to see. We hear it from individual people talking about it, but if a well-executed organizational network analysis will show you where you have disconnected people, it will show you where you have these isolated silos of networks, and it will help you start to see where you're bleeding out talent and innovation and where communication is breaking down and all of these things. And when you want to start having real conversations with people, like, this is such a powerful tool to make the invisible visible for leaders so that they can start to understand the significance of some of this work around all of the different things we're talking about.
And Jason, let me click down and pull the thread on exactly what you said. So as again, an example, and I know that these are very specific examples, but I want to make it super practical for everyone, is we ask a question, we have a series of what we refer to as relational benefits. And you get these, whether it's career advice, whether it's access to influencers in the organization, whether it's feedback, there's this treasure trove of relational benefits. Shockingly so, Jason, especially after the pandemic, we would ask people, of the network, identify which relational benefit you get from the 30 people you've identified or 20 people you've identified who you work most closely with. Shockingly, we would find in most organizations, 5% of the population would identify that they get no relational benefits from any of the people they work with. That is an absolute predictor of someone leaving the organization. If I get no benefit, if I get no sense of belonging, sense of thriving, helping my health, feedback, we are shocked. Once we see that 5%, we say these people are at risk for leaving almost immediately. If we can then teach them that they should be reaching out to people to get specific relational benefits, their likelihood of feeling connected, of belonging, of getting something back from the organization, they are much less at risk even by just beginning and saying, when you did this network analysis, you identified that there was no one had relational benefits. This was important. Now, there's privacy is really important here. We probably don't have time to get into that, but that would be an example of, even if you started to curate content to people to talk about the importance of relational benefits, and then say, perhaps, Greg, Jason is someone who you might want to reach out to, or to actually build a program, as I had the privilege to do at Workday, where we connected people intentionally to ensure that they were going to connect. And we facilitated that using the Fast Friends protocol, a way to accelerate the relationship. So I would reach out to you for career advice, or for access to information, or for just well-being. Hey, let's be part of the bike club. Maybe we can, cycle after work, as an example. Now I'm getting the relational benefit of health and wellness and well-being from you, and I'm feeling more connected to the organization. These networks can be architected intentionally, positively, for very specific organizational outcomes. And it's actually easy to do once you know, to your point, once you've done the network analysis, these are the 20 people we need to help reconnect to the company.
Yeah. It's like one of the roles that I have long felt that HR needs to take on fully is, I call it a social architect, is like understanding that you're in a seat to build these connections, right? To architect the organization. And this solution, what you just said, I want to just amplify that this is a bi-directional thing, is that yes, the organization can and should do things to make it easier to connect, to create the opportunity to connect, to proactively connect. But you can also equip people, a lot of people, and I mean, I'm shocked, and I'm sure, this is what you call it, a stupiphany, how many people like sort of intellectually maybe understand the value of relationships, but haven't sort of internalized it into, no, I can actually take some simple actions to build relationships, and that's going to bring me all the things that I'm looking for. It's going to bring me, more happiness and health and success, and all these things, well-being are connected to it. And so I think like enabling and equipping people for that is really important. I guess one quick question, because I think you hinted at this in the chapter, but I kind of wanted you to go deeper with this a little bit, is I think one of the barriers that gets in the way is time, right? So many organizations right now, there's such an overload on how much I'm asked to do and how many meetings I'm asked to sit in and all these things. And so when you go to somebody and you say, no, we need you to be, you should be proactively building relationships. And they're like, yeah, when am I supposed to do that? I don't have time for that. So I'm curious, how did you balance that? How did you accommodate for that sort of resource constraint?
Yeah, Jason, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do think one of the things that we know in a lot of our work, and we talk about it in the book as well, is that collaboration overload. Following the pandemic, we have seen an explosion of collaboration. Microsoft would report a 252% increase in the meetings we attended. All well-intentioned, but the collaborative intensity of work is exploding. And it's actually, if we let that it can actually drown us. And it's a big source of well-being. We've got a chapter in the book on, specifically Johnson & Johnson shared how they worked on well-being as it relates to collaborative overload, and specifically what they can do. And so I'll give you one super practical example to your point, and this is what we found in the study as well, is it's this idea of intentionality. It's not at all about big networks, Jason. It's about intentional, purpose-built networks. And so I would suggest, if you could only do one thing, if you're a new hire and it's consistent, or you're new to an organization, is ask for your manager's help in, one, identifying who to connect with, and then asking for them to make an introduction to you. To your point, we get instruction. Relationships are this company lives on relationships. Go build all these connections. That actually is very, I'll go as far as say it's bad advice, because you become overwhelmed. Versus having a few intentional relationships, to go and say, who is that person who I'm going to go get a sense of belonging and well-being? Who's going to be that person who's going to give me feedback? And perhaps, as an example, I get a buddy on my team, you're our manager or people leader, and you say, Sally, could I ask you to be Greg's feedback buddy? That's the only thing I want you to do, is I want you to provide once a week, connect with Greg and say, give him some feedback on things you noticed. you're then being very intentional. You're not asking 20 people to give feedback. You're asking Sally, and you're leveraging your connection to do that. We found in this particular case that we write up, an engaged and aware manager dramatically amplified the success of our pilot group. It was both a combination of that person, again, right? Talk about another stupiphany. You're like, really? You needed to do all this research to find that out? But it surprised this group, believe it or not. It wasn't a lot of work. It was saying, hey, once I as a manager understand it, I can be very intentional about making those connections and then facilitating those, trading my social capital for them and supporting them in these ideas of connections as one example. The other thing, and I'm sorry, and then I know, because I know we're already way over time, but the thing I would suggest to a new hire is ask the person you're connecting with, who would be one other person that they suggest I should connect with and why? Because very often I'll go to that first connection, but when I start to see a pattern where every time when I talk to Sally and Marie and Margaret, they say, oh, you should go talk to Toby about this. Toby, you realize then Toby is the central connector, that connecting with Toby. And then you ask for an invitation. Marie, would you mind connecting me with Toby? Trade social capital there, and getting to know Toby is going to be really important. As an example, you found a central energizing influencer in the group, and Toby becomes important to identify.
Well, and I think the other underlying thing I'm assuming is probably really valuable is when you're especially going back to like asking your manager for, like in asking them to engage in helping you figure out who you should connect with and making those introductions, is you're also sort of you're implicitly getting their permission to make time to go have these conversations. And I think that's one of the things that's really important for people to keep top of mind. In my work, the thing I always that I try to make sure leaders understand and that people understand is that time is the currency of relationships. And so as inconvenient as it is, you cannot build better relationships without investing time with people. It just isn't a thing. And so that is a resource thing that people have to be aware of. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. Sometimes it's using the time you already have more intentionally. There's a lot of things there, but I think these are some great, practices. I would call it a hack even a little bit. Some of these are really good practices to sort of, almost find ways to reallocate time or get sort of implicit permission to do things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise, it would be harder to find time to do.
And what I would build on there, Jason, 100% to your point. I mean, some interesting work done at Stony Brook University not too long ago on what's referred to as the Fast Friends Protocol. It definitely takes our brain a number of interactions to feel a sense of trust, to feel a sense of friendship, to feel a sense of relationship. And to build on your point as well, those can be accelerated using these hacks. I love that word, by the way. I think that's exactly it. These are actually neuro hacks to accelerate how someone perceives you in a very positive and constructive way. Again, some really interesting work on the Fast Friends Protocol. It appeared in the New York Times many years ago, a series of questions. I happened to use those questions in leadership development programs that we did, when I was at Workday. And we would intentionally dramatically accelerate the speed by which new friendships, trusted friendships or trusted relationships. So it definitely takes time, and there are hacks to neurologically accelerate that.
Well, I feel like we've dropped like 20 great nuggets already for people to pick up and go run with. And so this has been really, really good stuff. Before I let you go, I want to ask you kind of the crystal ball question I like to ask everyone, which is an aspirational, kind of a peek into your aspirations about the future of work. So as you think about 5 years from now, what do you hope will be different about work than it is today?
Yeah, I realize that there are definitely two sides, and there are things to be concerned about. But I'm actually very bullish on the application of AI to do the type of work, Jason, we're talking about. I see 5 years from now that the use of AI to take organization network analysis insights, to then combine it with research-based outcomes, and then to measure the research-based actions, and then measure the organizational outcomes. I am convinced it's not even going to take 5 years from now as I, spend time working with folks on this, but we will be able to take whether it's, sort of digital exhaust from a sort of passive network analysis or active network analysis and be able to then say, hey, Jason, these might be the people, given your current career stage, given the current work that you're doing, given the phase that your work is involved in, I might suggest that you connect with Sally on this, or Rohan on this, or Rimple on this. And here would be, when you connect with them, here would be one specific action or one skill you might apply in doing that. I'm super excited about our ability to take these network insights, and we have a ton of science on it, to then use it to give prescriptive playbooks to people and say, hey, here's how I can do what you've been doing and telling people forever. I think there's an opportunity to automate and augment that in a really exciting way that empowers, enables people to achieve different outcomes, greater success, and feel a greater sense of belonging and satisfaction.
I'm with you. I'm super intrigued. You're actually probably in doing the work. I'm just intrigued by the promise of like AI enhanced human connection, which feels, I think, to a lot of people ironic, but I think it's really not. I think we are so busy, and we have this tool that can help us. Like, to your point, I love it, who you should connect to. And when you get to connect, you might want to talk about these things. And like, why not? Like, why not? What an awesome opportunity. Yeah.
I'm excited about it. And I thank you for all of your work and your leadership in this space. I really believe that, the folks listening and for many other human capital practitioners, this makes sense as such a powerful tool. It is, as we've talked about, really easy to apply in many ways. And it's low-hanging fruit that no one is thinking about. And I think it's going to be really, really powerful for us to apply these, the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set in really practical ways moving forward.
All right, so let's land this plane. One quick check-out question with you as we wrap up our conversation today. Greg, what one word best describes how you feel about our chat today?
Gosh, I mean, I have to use energized, Jason. I'm always energized after we connect, and I hope it hasn't come across as too much for the audience. People are like, this guy, he's got to drink less coffee. I am so energized about the possibility I've seen firsthand myself, with others, with folks I've coached with. It is so powerful. I'm super energized about how it can unlock what we know through who we know.
For me, it is inspired. I really, really appreciate the work that you and the team are doing around this, because it is like, it's interesting. It's going to be kind of one of those, I think, overnight successes or overnight sort of breakthroughs, like 40 years in the making, that will kind of happen sometime soon. But I'm excited to be there, and I hope I can still connect with you once you guys are so busy doing this stuff that you won't have much time for anything else. So I am really inspired. I appreciate you being here. Greg, if people want to connect with you, where and how is the best way to connect with you?
Always happy to connect on LinkedIn. I know, again, it sounds so funny, but that is the preeminent sort of connection tool out there. And feel free. I mean, you can reach out to me at greg@connectedcommons.com. And, my role now, I've been lucky enough to have such a blessed career, Jason, that I'm able to just sort of be in a give back time and help folks out. And so, if people want to geek out or want access to articles or research or perspectives, I'm always happy to sort of to take time and share with people. So follow me on LinkedIn. I am not the smartest person in the room, but I know a lot of the smartest people in the room. And so I'm constantly promoting, Michael's work and Rob's work and Hemerson Paz at Roche. And, I'm sort of connected to the people who are doing the good work. And so I'm happy to promote. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm always out there promoting what I think is the best work out there.
And and I can attest, you're incredibly generous and supportive, and your passion for this is infectious. So thank you for that. I will include links in the show notes for all how to connect, where to find Greg on LinkedIn and the Connected Commons website. We'll also put some information about the book, so you can be watching out for that and looking for a copy in the spring when that publishes. Greg, thank you so much for joining me. This was everything I wanted it to be. So thank you so much. I feel really inspired and excited about the future. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you for all of your leadership in this space. So grateful.
And thank you for listening. I hope that you can pick up some of these nuggets that we put down today, not only to maybe impact your organization, but also to maybe think about how you can build your network a little bit to amplify your work, to bring to bear some social capital to amplify the impact of your human capital, all the things that you know and the skills that you've built. Go forth and use it to make a difference. And as always, just a reminder, reach out and check in with those people who matter most to you. Might be the most important thing you can do today. I'll see you next time.